My name is Claire, and today I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share with anyone outside my own head. It's not a story filled with obvious scandals or loud betrayals, but with whispers, glances, and silences so heavy that they could crush you. This is a story about temptation, about what it means to be loyal when your heart starts to wander, and about how betrayal can happen long before a single line is ever crossed. It all began on what should have been an ordinary weekend in our coastal home in Santa Barbara. But nothing about that weekend ended up being ordinary. Michael, my husband, had left early that Friday morning, a business trip to San Francisco. He traveled often, and though I always encouraged him, I won't lie, the house felt emptier each time he was gone. Our home sat on the coast, a modest but beautiful place with wide windows that let in the golden morning light and the endless sound of the waves. That morning, I decided to throw myself into cleaning. Something about order and routine always helped me fight the loneliness. I opened the windows, let the salty air drift in, and played my favorite soft jazz. The music floated gently through the rooms, blending with the ocean breeze. I wore a simple white t-shirt and denim shorts, the kind of clothes that made it easy to move around. I climbed a small stool in the living room to dust the shelves, humming along with the music. And that's when I felt it. The undeniable sensation of someone standing behind me. When I turned, I saw Evan. Evan was Michael's son from his first marriage, 21, quiet, thoughtful, with a kind of presence that filled the room, even when he didn't say a word. His hair was still messy from sleep, his eyes heavy but sharp, watching me in a way that made my breath catch for just a moment. I smiled, trying to sound casual. "Good morning." He nodded, his voice low. "Morning." He walked into the room and sank onto the sofa, his gaze following me as I climbed down from the stool. I tried to ignore it, tried to continue dusting as if the weight of his stare wasn't pressing against my back. We made small talk about his internship, his projects, his plans. But the conversation carried an odd undercurrent, something unspoken, threading itself between every word. And then it happened. The stool wobbled beneath me as I reached for a frame on the top shelf. I gasped, certain I would fall. But before I could, Evan was there, his hand gripping my arm, steadying me firmly. The room went still. His hold was protective, almost too protective. For a second too long, our eyes locked. I laughed nervously, pulling away. "Thank you, that could have been bad." But the moment stayed. The silence stretched, and something in his eyes, something unguarded, made me feel like we'd crossed into dangerous territory without meaning to. The weekend alone. The rest of the day unfolded slowly, each moment more charged than the last. The house, usually so open and breezy, now felt smaller. Sunlight poured through the windows, but instead of filling me with peace, it highlighted every glance, every silence. At one point, as I sat on the sofa with a book, Evan sat across from me, saying little. Yet every time I lifted my eyes, he was already looking. Not with disrespect, not even with arrogance, but with a steady, searching gaze that unsettled me because I couldn't name what it meant. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just my own loneliness projecting things that weren't there. But then he said something simple, so simple, yet it rattled me. "I like mornings like this," he said softly, "peaceful, especially when they're shared." I froze. The words themselves were harmless, but the way he said them, slow, deliberate, carrying weight far beyond their surface, made my pulse quicken. I forced a smile, tried to change the subject, but inside, I knew. Something had shifted. The weight of silence. That night, the silence in the house was unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows seemed louder than it should have been. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of Michael hundreds of miles away, working, trusting me, loving me. And then I thought of Evan, just down the hall, and the way his words had lingered like smoke in my chest. Nothing had happened, and yet it felt like something had. The next day was no easier. We crossed paths in the kitchen, in the hallway, on the porch. Each time, the tension grew heavier. I caught him watching me, not with open desire, but with a quiet intensity that frightened me, because it mirrored something inside myself, the longing to be seen. When he spoke, it was only in fragments, but the silences said more than any sentence could. The question. That evening, as I watered the rose bushes in the backyard, I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. I knew who it was. His voice came quietly, hesitant but direct. "Are you avoiding me?" The hose trembled in my hand. My mouth opened, but no words came, because the truth was too sharp to admit. Yes, I was avoiding him. Not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he'd done something far worse. He'd made me feel. I stayed silent, staring at the roses, pretending to focus on them. He didn't press further. He just stood there, his silence heavier than his question. And in that silence, I heard everything he didn't say. Michael's return. By Sunday evening, Michael was home. The moment he walked through the door, his face lit up with the same warm smile he always wore. He wrapped me in a hug, kissed my forehead, told me he'd missed me. His voice was steady, familiar, safe. Evan stepped forward, greeting his father with a smile that looked natural on the surface, but didn't reach his eyes. The three of us sat together, Michael recounting stories from his trip, his laughter filling the room. I laughed too, nodded, said all the right words, but part of me was still trapped in the silence of the weekend. Evan kept his distance, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes heavy with something unspoken. When our gazes met briefly, it was enough to remind me a fracture had opened in this family, and no one but us knew it. The breaking point. The days that followed didn't erase what had happened. They only deepened the wound. Every shared glance carried weight. Every silence echoed. And though nothing had happened physically, emotionally, we had already crossed into dangerous waters. One evening, when Michael was out with friends, Evan finally said the words neither of us wanted to hear. "I can't pretend nothing happened." He whispered, "I can't stop thinking about it." My stomach dropped. Because I understood, because I felt the same, but I couldn't let it be spoken into existence. I shook my head, my voice trembling. "Evan, We can't let this continue. This family is everything. Your father, he trusts us. If we care about him, we have to stop." He looked at me, torn, desperate, but slowly nodded. His silence this time was not heavy with longing. It was heavy with grief. The goodbye, not long after, Evan received an offer for an internship in New York. It was the kind of opportunity he had been working toward, and Michael was overjoyed. He hugged his son with pride, his face beaming. I smiled too, but inside I felt hollow. On the day Evan left, I hugged him longer than I should have. His voice was steady when he said, "Take care of yourself." "You too," I whispered, and then he was gone. His car disappeared down the coastal road, leaving me standing in the doorway with the sound of the ocean filling the silence. It felt like a chapter had closed, but not cleanly, more like a page torn out, leaving jagged edges behind. The aftermath. That night, I sat beside Michael in our warm, familiar living room. He reached for my hand, his eyes soft with love. To him, nothing was broken. But inside me, everything was different. I thought of the weekend, of the silences, the glances, the words left unsaid, of how close I'd come to betraying him. Not with actions, but with emotions I never should have allowed. And I realized something that night. Betrayal doesn't always happen in the open. Sometimes it hides in the quiet, in the almosts, in the silences you can never admit. Reflection. It has been months since then, but the memory still lingers. The temptation, the guilt, the silence, they all live inside me like shadows that never quite fade. Sometimes I ask myself, was it love? Was it loneliness? Or was it just the human? What I do know is this. Sometimes the deepest betrayals are the ones no one else ever sees. And sometimes the hardest secret to live with is not what you've done, but what you almost let yourself feel.